Hello everyone and welcome back. In today's video, I'm going to show how I remove and replace the lower ball joints in the Chevy Blazer. It's a 2000 Blazer. The lug nuts and the center hub is behind this hubcap, but I'm going to keep this wheel on the ground when I loosen these nuts to keep the pressure on. Show you some of the setup that I have. I'm using two jack stands. I'm working on gravel here, so I want to make sure this stays put. I have the wheel chucked in the back and the other wheel chucked on the other side. I'm sloping downhill slightly, so I'm more concerned about it rolling downhill. I have this jack for the truck, and I have this other jack over here that I'm going to be raising the spring up with. These are just some of the tools I'll be using. I know I'll be bringing more tools out as we go along, but you will need a hammer, and it's always good to have one of these magnets around. Today I'm going to try using this Chicago electric impact wrench. I have a pneumatic impact wrench, but I want to see how this electric one works with this truck. So let's get started. Here's how I have it set up. I have the jack underneath the two jack stands, and these bolts came right off. If you don't have an impact wrench, just keep the tire on the ground and use a breaker bar, and you'll be able to get it out. That's how I've done it for years. You will need a 36mm socket, which I didn't have. In my area, we have an AutoZone. They lend you this tool. You leave them an $85 deposit, which you get back. Now, I did brush off this bolt and lubricate it a little bit, but everything came right out. Well, guys, it looks like I'm starting to get some weather right now. Let me show you what I'm looking at. I'm going to the other side of the vehicle because the ball joint on that side is in worse shape than this one, and I know I'm not going to get both of them done today. In addition to that, I'm not going to be able to film this as I'm doing it. I'm going to show you what I'm going to do, then I'll show you what it looks like when it's done. You see on this side, I have the control arm jacked up to relieve the pressure. I have the jack under the Blazer, the two jack stands. This one's holding the main support up, and I have that wheel chucked back there. Little knee pad. I'm going to lay down a piece of plywood to lay on this gravel. Get yourself a bucket. As you're taking things apart and throwing tools in, it just makes it easier. When you're working outside like this, it's real easy to lose items. This nut's for the ball joint, so we know this ball joint was changed once before. This is the upper ball joint. I lubricated this nut and this one over here. It holds the line for the ABS. That's going to have to be pulled off the hub. I don't know if I'm going to be able to get those off without breaking them. I'm sorry about this camera being shaky. I just don't have the time to set up a tripod, so if you could bear with me. This tie rod end is good, but look at the grease that's built up over here. That zerk fitting's clogged. It's just all over the place. Now, this axle is going to have to be pushed out. If you get the nut and put the nut back on, let me get this going. Oh, turn it around. Screw this nut back onto the axle. Get it flush. Once it's flush, you could hit this with a hammer to push that axle back out. Or if you have a pneumatic gun, you can hit it right in there and it'll push it through. When you're removing the hub from the axle, you want to be careful you don't separate it back in here. Now this brake caliper has to be removed. There's two bolts that hold this on. This one on, there we go. This one on top and this one on the bottom. Before you pull the caliper off, get a pry bar or a screwdriver and push the brake pad back. Because if you have an older disc like this, you have a little bit of a lip, it's going to be hard to get the brake off. And it'd be a good time to change your brakes if they needed changing now. You're going to have everything apart. Then you have the caliper bracket that has to come off, and there's 2 bolts. The storm is coming in. I really have to get moving with this. Now I'm using a breaker bar and a socket. Let's see if I get the camera in on this a little better. This impact wrench with the socket won't fit back here on top. It'll fit on the bottom but not on the top. A pneumatic one might fit. I'm just using this breaker bar. I'm moving the brake caliper right now. There's those 2 bolts, just the top one. Once it's off, you want to hang this caliper. Don't hang it by this hose. It'll break it or stretch it or make it leak. I have it hanging by a coat hanger. Now I have to get to this caliper bracket. There's this bolt up here and on the bottom. They're 18mm. See this one on top? Oh, and this will have to be pushed. You can't get in there. This one on top, you can't get in there with a socket. You have to use a wrench. The one on the bottom, you could use a socket and an impact wrench. Now, this is tight and you need the extra leverage. So I'm just clamping 2 wrenches together and we'll get it out. Next, we have this ABS line. These bolts, these nuts over here are going to snap if I try to get them off. It's just going to create more problems. So what I decided to do was to take it off at the hub. This is a 4mm Allen wrench. It's in there tight and you have to put extreme pressure on it to loosen that up. Well, in this case it is. Look at the rust. Once you get it out, you want to be careful not to lose this. Put it in something and this will pull right out. Be careful with this. Don't bang it around. Mine might be shot anyway. They might have to be changed, but take precautions with it. And put a piece of tape over the hole it came out of. Keep the rust out of there. Right there. Now we have the caliper off, the caliper bracket off, the ABS off. Now we have to remove these bolts. Now we have to remove these nuts. There's a tie rod end nut with the cotter pin. And the 2 ball joints have the cotter pins in them also. Now that I have this hub off, you can see it's a greasy, rusty mess. I'm going to clean this up before I do anything else. Get this grease off, knock off as much rust as I can. And just make it a lot easier putting it back together. I'm going to move this out of the way. And I have to get these 4 bolts off on this lower ball joint. Now this ball joint was changed once before. If it wasn't, it would be rivets in there and not nuts and bolts. I lubricated these to try to get them to come off slightly easier, but you can see how loose this ball joint is. Okay. This was really tough getting it out. Now once I have this all cleaned up, yes, keep your gloves on. As I go, do as I say. Anyway, once I get these bolts off, I'll be back. These are the pins for the brakes. You want to make sure they're not rusted or pitted. Lubricate them before you put them back on, and the little rubber boots that are on the caliper, put some of the lubrication in there also. Good time to change these pads. This backing plate should be changed. I just don't have the time to go on and get it right now, so I'm just going to leave it on there. But I'm going to have to come back in and change these brakes at some point, just not today. For now, this is as clean as I can get this, and I have to get it back together. But before we do that, we have to get that ball joint in. Getting it in is fairly simple. It's just 4 bolts that hold it up there. Nuts and bolts. It comes with the ball joint. Keep everything secured. Make sure that caliper's secured. The tie rod end is holding its own. Keep that ABS line out of the way so you don't snap that end. Now that the ball joint is in, I have to reassemble that hub. There's these 4 nuts. The hub has to go up and in. I'm going to go clean my hands. Come back with some gloves. This isn't to keep them clean. This is to keep them from getting torn up on this rust. With this ball joint, this washer came with it. It wasn't on the old one, but it's a different make, so it has to go on. Get myself in position over here. Okay. Now this hub has to connect on the bottom. Let me lower this axle. This has to get in there also. Now there's 3 points that this has to connect to. You have the upper ball joint, the lower ball joint, and the tie rod end. Now let me try to wiggle that in there. Oh, and you have to get the axle in at the same time also. So they have all 4 points. I have to get that washer under there. There we go. Once you start getting it in, starting with this bottom one first. Connect the castle nut. Not tightening it up, just putting it on there to hold it on. And it's got to come up a little bit more. Not enough thread sticking out of the bottom yet. Nope. Okay, let's try it again. I got it now. There we go. It's in. It would have helped if I had this nut off on the upper ball joint. I put it there so I wouldn't lose it. Now you can see it doesn't reach. This upper control arm will move a little bit, but not enough to come down to this. So I'm going to raise the bottom control arm up with the jack. Once that comes up some, I'll be able to push that into there. Okay, got it in. Don't forget, once you tighten it, put those cotter pins in. As far as the torque, I'll give you a list of torque specs at the end that I got offline, but I suggest that you go to a manual and get your manual. Tie rod end is in. Upper and lower ball joints are connected. Now I have to get this ABS line back in there. I kept this clean by having a piece of tape over the hole. Making sure everything's still steady. Now this is the caliper bracket. I'm going to install this. There's those 2 bolts that hold this on, upper and lower. They're 18 millimeter. Once I install that, I'll put the caliper on. Okay, with the caliper on. I want to point out these Zerk fittings. They were clogged before. I didn't have new ones. What I did, I took them off. I just heated them up a little bit, cleaned them out. This nut, I suggested that you put a new spindle lock nut on. I have a link in the description down below if you want to order one online before you start the job. To save yourself some time before you start this job, take off your wheel, take a look at everything underneath and see what you need. Don't make the mistake I did. You see that I need a new backing plate? I already had the brake shoes, but check everything out before you start it. Because once you have it apart, rather than having to go back in again, you can get it done all at once. Save yourself a lot of aggravation. Well, guys, as I mentioned before, I would go to a manual to get the specs on the torques, but online, you can use this as a gauge. Online, they have the drive axle hub nut is 103 foot-pounds. The ball joint, steering knuckle to the steering knuckle, the castle nut, the lower is 79 foot-pounds. The ball joint to the steering knuckle, the castle nut, the upper is 61 foot-pounds. And the 4 nuts and bolts, the replacement nuts and bolts, are 17 foot-pounds. I would just use that as a reference in case you don't have a manual in front of you, but I would definitely check with a manual before I talk these down. Well, guys, that's a wrap. If you found this video useful or entertaining, let me know by posting your comments down below, and be sure to give it a like. And if you haven't done so already, subscribe. Oh, and be sure to hit that bell so you don't miss my new upcoming videos. Until next time, stay safe and stay well.